Hello there, and welcome to the weekly Outside Views report on politics in Asia and Oceania. According to entrepreneur Elon Musk, satellite internet service Starlink is making progress in deploying its facilities in Iran. Musk said on Monday they are close to having 100 active Starlinks in Iran. In September, in the face of anti-government protests in the country, he said he wanted to activate Starlink there as part of a US-backed initiative to promote internet freedom and the free flow of information. Earlier this year, Musk activated Starlink services in Ukraine as well. Musk company SpaceX has long been building a dense network of satellites in space to create a global internet. The services will also be used by the Ukrainian army as a set in the fight against the Russian war of aggression. The satellite-based broadband service could help protesters in Iran circumvent government-imposed restrictions on access to the internet and certain social media platforms. In Iran, there have been violent protests against the country's government and the leadership for months. The trigger was the death of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini. She died in police custody in September after being arrested for allegedly violating Iran's strict Islamic dress code for women. And she died in custody of the morale police. The protests represent one of the greatest challenges for the Islamic Republic, which is ruled by Shiite Muslims since the 1979 revolution. Tehran sees enemies of Iran and their domestic allies behind the protests and accuses them of trying to form or to force a political change of power. The Iranian leadership sees the United States and Israel as enemies, but also Saudi Arabia, Great Britain, France, and my home country of Germany. According to human rights activists, more than 450 demonstrators have already been killed. 11 people have been sentenced to death by the Iranian judiciary, and 2 executions have already been carried out. The terrorist militia Islamic State, or ISIS, has claimed responsibility for an attack on high-ranking Taliban security officials in northern Afghanistan. The police chief of Badakhshan province, Abdel Haq Abu Omar, was killed by a car bomb on Monday. That's what the ISIS spokesman Marc reported and published a video of the attack. The police chief is considered the highest-ranking Talib killed since the Islamists took power in 2021 in August. According to the Taliban, at least 2 other security forces died in the attack. Since the Taliban took power, ISIS had stepped up its attacks in Afghanistan. The focus is mostly on religious minorities and foreign embassies. Both ISIS and the Taliban belong to Sunni Islam, however, both are at odds with each other. The Taliban have been back in power in Afghanistan since Western forces withdrew in August 2021. President Ashraf Ghani fled the country after an Islamist offensive. Western countries closed their diplomatic missions and evacuated their personnel. The Taliban had initially promised to govern more moderately than during their reign of terror from 1996 to 2001. Recently, however, people have been publicly flogged several times and 1 man publicly executed. Women are increasingly being pushed out of public life. Fears that the Taliban could use biometric data collected by the US military and the German federal government in Afghanistan to specifically identify people they consider their enemies now also seem to be confirmed. That was reported by a German news station. A technical analysis confirms that biometric devices left behind after the withdrawal could pose a real threat to local people. Because data stored on the devices is not protected against access by encryption and password protection and can easily be circumvented. The Taliban could use these devices immediately, said a Hamburg computer scientist Matthias, and he told this to the TV station. However, it's unclear how many such devices were used in Afghanistan and how many of them the Islamists now have. But it's particularly sensitive that some of the people listed are explicitly identified as former members of the police and military, and this makes it clear who worked as a helper for Western forces. The use of the devices was extremely careless. That was criticized by the human rights organization Human Rights Watch. According to a report by the state news agency KCNA, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un ordered the production of tactical nuclear weapons to be ramped up at a meeting of the ruling Labour Party on Sunday. According to the article, new ballistic ICBMs are also to be developed. The measures were to counter threats from the United States and South Korea, Kim said. In a situation where South Korea has undoubtedly become a clear enemy, the mass production of tactical nuclear weapons is important and necessary. That's how South Korea's Yonhap news agency quoted Kim as saying in a speech distributed by state media. The South Korean military said the series of North Korean missile tests was a serious provocation, damaging peace and stability on the Korean peninsula and beyond, and called on Pyongyang to stop the tests. The US military said in a statement that the test did not pose a threat to either its own territory or that of Washington allies, but highlighted the destabilizing effects of North Korea's weapons program. According to a report by the Japanese news agency Kyodo, Japan's defense minister Yasukazu Hamada lodged a protest with North Korea over the renewed missile test. North Korea had already fired 3 ballistic missiles on Saturday. Overall, the internationally isolated country tested more missiles in 2022 than ever before. Fears are growing that North Korea could face a nuclear test for the first time since 2017. China has appointed its previous ambassador to the United States, Xin Gang, as its new foreign minister. As reported by Chinese state media on Friday, he is replacing the chief diplomat Wang Yi, who has been in office since 2013. Xin is also known as a wolf warrior in China, meaning a tough stance against the West. The US government stated that it wanted to work well with the new Secretary of State. A native of the northeastern city of Tianjin, Xin has been Beijing's top representative in Washington since last year and is charged with getting ties between the world's 2 largest economies back on track. He is fluent in English and has gained some notoriety in the US for repeatedly publicly explaining China's position. In 2020, Xin said that China's image in the West has deteriorated because Europe and the United States have never accepted the Chinese political system and the country's economic rise. In Xin's view, the People's Republic has little to learn from the West. From 2018 to last year, Xin served as deputy foreign minister. Before 2018, he frequently met with President Xi and in his capacity as head of the Foreign Ministry's Protocol Department. The diplomat previously worked for several years as a spokesman for the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The State Department in Washington said that US Secretary of State Antony Blinken expects to continue to maintain a productive working relationship with Secretary of State Xin in this role. The US government will continue to maintain open channels of communication in order to responsibly shape relations with the People's Republic of China. Blinken plans to visit Beijing in early 2023. A court of the military junta in Myanmar has sentenced de facto Prime Minister Aung San Suu Kyi to a further 7 years in prison on the final charges of her 18-month trial. A judicial source told the AFP that Suu Kyi has been convicted of 5 charges related to helicopter rental and maintenance. Suu Kyi's trial has now come to an end, the source said. There are no further charges against her. The German press agency also refers to a person familiar with the process and reports another 7-year prison sentence. A total of 19 procedures were initiated against the 77-year-old. The Nobel Prize winner was sentenced to 33 years in prison for various alleged offenses, including incitement to riot. Her lawyers now want to appeal. Suu Kyi has been in solitary confinement in a prison in the capital, Naypyidaw, for 6 months after being placed under house arrest following the February 2021 military coup. The trial started in June 2021. The trials were closed to the public, and Suu Kyi's lawyers were not allowed to speak to media representatives. Observers spoke of show trials and saw the charges as an attempt by the junta to secure its own power. The Nobel Peace Prize winner appeared to be in good health, the source said. The 77-year-old has only been seen once since the trial began in blurry state media photos from a courtroom. The generals justified their overthrow with alleged fraud in the November 2020 election, which Suu Kyi and her National League for Democracy party had clearly won. They presented no evidence, though. Since then, the former Burma has descended into chaos and violence. The junta is trying to use all its might to suppress popular resistance. Again and again, they act brutally against opponents. According to the prisoner aid organization AAPP, more than 2,600 people have been killed and more than 16,600 arrested since the coup. In Japan, industrial production fell further in November. According to a statement from the Ministry of Economics, production only fell slightly. However, it was the third setback in a row for the industrial companies in the world's third largest economy. In November, production shrank by 0.1% month-on-month. That's what the ministry said. Analysts had expected a slightly stronger decline of 0.2%. The production of export goods declined more significantly. A drop of 0.5% was reported there. Total production was reported to have fallen 3.2% in October and 1.7% in September. Japanese industrial production also contracted year-on-year in November. In this regard, the ministry reported a decline of 1.3%. Economists pointed to the slowing world economy. The possibility of a recession in the economies of important Japanese trading partners is weighing on the country's industry. The continuing weakness in production should strengthen the Japanese central bank in its course of continuing to support the economy with a loose monetary policy. This is also evident from the minutes of the most recent interest rate meeting of the central bank. Despite the widening range of 10-year government bond yields, monetary policy should remain loose. That's what a central bank member said at the December 19th to 20 interest rate meeting, according to a summary of statements by monetary officials released on Wednesday. Central Bank President Haruhiko Kuroda said, he previously made similar statements and he said quite the same. And this concludes this week's report on Asia and Oceania. But of course, tomorrow you have the chance to see the next one. I'll see you in my next video. I'll be back.